Should we get to it?
Let's get into it.
I am coming very raw on purpose. So I would like
I'm
to.
prepared.
I know you are. You've got your notes out.
I'm itching.
I know you've been like chomping at the bit, all week. I can feel it in the chat all week that like Steve's like, I am structuring my thoughts. Did you see this tweet? So we definitely want to hear from the ground up. I don't even want to lay out the foundation because all I know is there's something about core op return. There's some data on the thing. There's some drama. So can you just lay it out like 101 style and the basics of what is going on, why this blew up right now, what's happening, and give me a moment to like even just clarify a little bit around like what the foundation is before, because I think you're ready to go. I'm saying let's get the foundation.
Explain it like we're five.
Yeah.
I think there's like many different subtopics here. We'll get to all of them, but perhaps the best place to start is the Bitcoin blockchain. Is it for money or is it for data? That's, I think, at the heart of this issue, and a reason why there's so much emotion and engagement on this topic. But by the way, I'll say, even though it's like been a shit show on Twitter and stuff, I absolutely love how passionate people are about Bitcoin. Yeah. So even when one person thinks the other person's being an idiot about a topic, I just love everyone.
Dude, apathy is
everyone's enthusiasm is incredible. So, but yeah, so let's start with like money versus data and get into that. So I think everyone that knows anything about Bitcoin knows it's to transfer money. Like Bitcoin, the asset, is or can become money. I mean, you can debate about, is it yet money, but it's a new form of money. You can transfer value. You can send payments to people, transactions. Everyone knows that. You can, data has also been stored in the Bitcoin blockchain. It started with Satoshi's Genesis block. He stored data on the blockchain. He put an English phrase in it.
And money is data, right? So the kind of data you're talking about is like non-monetary data?
Non-monetary,
Okay.
yeah. So if I simplify it to money versus data, I'm talking about non-monetary data.
Okay.
Yep. But then there's even, breakdown of like all kinds of different types of data, right? So there's certainly, I think probably a majority of Bitcoiners, or certainly many Bitcoiners, believe that Bitcoin should only be used for money, value transfer, and not for this non-monetary data, with like JPEGs being the canonical like laughing stock or like thing you point out, like it's not supposed to be for that. But we'll get into like different types of data too. And when you get into the nuances, all of a sudden some people are like, get those JPEGs out of the blockchain, are like, okay, well that type of data is okay.
And just without knowing a lot about where this is going, when I hear, I think about Bitcoin as built to make money work well in this new way. So I'm kind of like sympathetic to the idea of like, make the money thing work well. And like, if there's other use cases, if they can be supported, fine, but you don't necessarily need to bend over backwards or create new features to support that.
Yep. And I mean, throughout this discussion, I'll try to point out my own personal view or bias, but I'm also going to do my best to steelman everyone's views and have a comprehensive discussion. But yeah, my own personal view on like, should Bitcoin be used for money versus non-monetary data? Again, it gets into the nuances of the data, but like, yeah, I'm in this for the money part. So if I could wave a magic wand and the Bitcoin blockchain's only for money, I would be for that. But we'll get into the details, and like we don't even know. We don't think that's even possible.
And that's not because you're some greedy bastard. That's because like it was designed
to
solve this problem around money. It wasn't really designed for generalized data storage.
Yeah. But the reality is, the consensus rules that we've all agreed on and use and relied on since the original Genesis block allows for data to be stored.
Yep.
And that is what the consensus rules are. We've all agreed to them. So even if we don't like some types of data that have been stored, it's permissionless and it's possible. We also, I have spoken to many engineers who say there's no known way to even prevent it if we wanted to.
Exactly.
Like highly credible engineers. So I don't think if we collectively decided, let's change the consensus rules to disallow data, we don't know how to do it, because if you strip out all the existing techniques to storing data, op return and taproot leaves and stuff like that, and like the witness script, even just basic transactions themselves, you can always embed invisible data, invisible to other data in it. So it's impossible to do. So I think that's so a lot of this drama, my observation is there's a lot of people who haven't spent that much time on all these details, and we're going to walk through the details in the show. And one important thing to understand is we don't know how to block the data. So even if you don't like it, like there's nothing that can be done. So one interesting dynamic is that you'll see in this like civil war this week or whatever, there's that one side you've got like the JPEG folks who literally are, work at the companies that put the JPEGs in the blockchain, and they're pro JPEGs. Then you have a lot of hardcore Bitcoiners who are anti JPEGs. They don't like the JPEGs. They don't want it on Bitcoin, but they're on the same side here because I think they both realize you can't stop it. So that's part of this discussion. But money versus data. So what is the specific issue that's being discussed this week? There's been a long running Bitcoin Core policy to in general, they're called standardness rules. So Bitcoin Core is very opinionated about certain types of transactions, whether they're standard or non-standard. We've talked about this specific issue on the show before. It's super in the weeds, but it is important for all Bitcoiners to understand. There's consensus rules, and then there's Bitcoin Core policy, relay policy. This is a policy which transactions someone running Bitcoin Core will relay on to other nodes and eventually get to miners. So if you, David, if you broadcast a Bitcoin transaction that's non-standard according to Bitcoin Core, it is highly unlikely to reach a miner and get mined. However, you can find other ways to reach that miner and get that transaction mined because it's perfectly consensus valid. And that's where products like Slipstream from Marathon, which were introduced over a year ago, they provide that service. So you can just go to their website or use their API, submit your transactions, and they'll happily pay them a fee and they'll happily mine them.
And just to be clear, when we say Bitcoin Core, I think sometimes people think of that as core developers, which are people, and then sometimes people think of it as the client called Bitcoin Core. I think you're talking about the client. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, sort of both. I mean, Bitcoin Core contributors decided to create these policies for Bitcoin Core, the project and the software. Another thing that people sometimes get confused about is like they conflate Bitcoin Core with being Bitcoin.
Right.
Or that Bitcoin Core, the software project, and one implementation of Bitcoin equals Bitcoin. Now, there's a reason for that confusion because it dominates the network. It's like nearly every node being run on Bitcoin uses Bitcoin Core.
Do you know the actual stats? Like what percentage is non-Bitcoin Core?
I mean, there's different ways you can measure nodes, but on the order of like 98%.
Wow.
And like back in 2018, I went out and spoke to like 40 different companies running Bitcoin at the time, and all of them ran Bitcoin Core.
Okay.
Like Coinbase and Square, et cetera. So because of that dominance, like, if Bitcoin Core changes a consensus rule, it gets merged and it gets deployed and there's not an uproar and people just upgrade like they normally do, they're going to accept that change. If they change a policy rule, then people are going to accept it unless there's an uproar and like some kind of, confrontation. So that's why, it's its own implementation. It's not Bitcoin, but it in some certain ways effectively is.
And I also want to just follow up on something else you said. If I had a transaction that was unlikely to get relayed through Bitcoin Core clients, you mentioned Marathon Slipstream product. Is that something like the mempool accelerator where I can pay to get it mined no matter what?
So mempool has this. I heard last night that Antpool also has this. I mean, accelerators have existed for a long time, like 10 plus years.
It was always OTC though before, I guess.
Well, it was more like my transaction got stuck in the mempool.
Okay.
Pay a miner or mining pool a fee to get it unstuck, and they get it mined. It became much more popular a few years ago when inscriptions and NFTs and BRC20 and all these different tokens took off on Bitcoin. That's when mempool and Marathon introduced these products, and it was just much more popular.
But to be clear, the takeaway though is that if I'm willing to pay whatever the market rate is from these different accelerator products, I can get my block mined, even if Core doesn't relay the transaction.
Yep. Yeah.
But the market is a different market in a sense, right? It's like a one-off. Whereas if you submit it to the mempool with a fee that everybody can see, then it's kind of a decentralized but common market.
Open order book, yeah.
And if you go around and say, hey, let's just do a side deal here to get this one done, that's like open and decentralized, but not really visible necessarily to everybody.
And we're going to go a little deeper on that
and those
shortly, because that is a key point in this whole debate. But yeah, so it's really important for people to understand consensus versus policy, and that even if you don't like, or let's talk about what OP return even is. Yeah. So OP return, it's just an opcode in Bitcoin script. It's been around from the beginning. It allows you to store data in the blockchain. So you have to pay the standard Bitcoin transaction. You have to pay fees just like you would any other transaction, but you're not paying anyone else. You're just storing data. So you do have to pay Bitcoin fees. It does not create an unspent transaction output, a UTXO. So that's critical to understand that.
And how do you create an op return? Do you use like Electrum or Sparrow or something? You just like create an op return transaction and submit it?
Yeah, I don't know like exactly which wallets give you that feature, but probably
it's like a wallet
Electrum
type thing. You just submit.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so long ago, like 10, 12 years ago, this is when like colored coins started becoming popular. So very similar as today, just like a less
history repeats.
Yeah.
Rhymes,
but so doing colored coins in Bitcoin, this is before there were a lot of really any other, or not that many other altcoins, right? And people wanted to do colored coins on Bitcoin, and then it created the debate, the same debate, money versus data. And so it was decided then by core developers to add this policy to not to eliminate OP return, but to limit how much data one could store in one Bitcoin transaction that uses OP return. I believe it's 80 bytes.
And that was 10 years ago or more?
I think like 2013 era.
Okay, and what's the profile or the composition of people who are contributors to Bitcoin Core today versus then? Is that mostly the same people, mostly different people?
Every core maintainer is different today than then.
Okay.
There are some contributors then that are still contributors today. There's some contributors then who are who open PRs on Core today that aren't regular contributors. Like the PR in question was opened by Peter Todd, who that's another like subtopic here. Like who even is a core developer, right?
Yeah.
To most people who don't get into the weeds in this stuff, like Jameson Lopp's a core dev and Peter Todd's a core dev, and Jameson Lopp is like decidedly not a core dev. He's a Bitcoiner. He's technical. He's a Bitcoin developer. He knows a lot about Bitcoin Core. He's written about it. In many ways, he's an expert on it, but he's never been like a regular core contributor. And Peter Todd is more of a occasional Bitcoin Core contributor. But anyway, the debate back then was like what to do about op return. The decision was to create this policy rule: don't relay transactions that have an OP return transaction that has more than 80 byte payload of data. And it's been that way ever since. I don't think it's changed since then. Let's get to the heart of it. Like, what's the PR in question this week? Everyone's debating. It eliminates that policy so that you can, if this PR is merged, if Core is released, and if that release of Core gets adopted, then you could create a transaction with an OP return of 150 bytes or 1,000 bytes, or I think all the way up to 100 kilobytes. Which hits another standardness limit. I mean, the consensus limit is one megabyte.
Yeah, exactly.
Or actually, with witness data, like 4 megabytes. But there's another standardness rule which I believe limits one transaction to 100K, and so that would be like the new limit for OP return.
Well, I don't understand. What is that limit? Why is the limit not 1 megabyte or 4 megabytes?
I forget the reason to limit any transaction to 100K offhand, but there's some like either security or DOS attack.
Okay.
Actually, let me really quick. There's so many ways we can go here, but why do these standardness rules even exist? I mean, that's what you're going to ask. But
let me add some color on that question. Is my understanding is a lot of the opcodes got shut off very quickly because Satoshi was worried about different types of exploits. He said, just shut them off. We'll bring them back if and when they need to be. Op return is one of those, right?
It was not shut off.
It was not shut off. And so do we know anything about why it was not shut off? Was it like heavily used early on, or?
I mean, I guess it wasn't considered to be there was no DOS attack or security concerns with it.
Okay.
And then actually was going to be my point on the why do these policy rules even exist? So Instagibbs did an analysis of this a couple of years ago. The policy zoo, he called it, and then a few other core developers have written about it. But the different categories of these various policies, they fall into policies that help mitigate denial of service attacks against Bitcoin. A second category is reduce risk of security vulnerabilities. Well, I'll get into each of these. The third is around future soft fork upgrade hooks, like ways to actually change consensus through a soft fork, preserving those, because you can create a consensus valid transaction that sort of like stampedes on top of that, and then you can't use that unused opcode in the future for a soft fork upgrade. So there's those three categories. Every policy fits into those three categories except for one, and that's the OP return. So the analysis done by some core devs for that called the OP return policy paternalistic, because it's the only one that you can argue is like Bitcoin Core telling Bitcoin users, we don't think you should do this. It's more opinionated. Where the others, like clearly from a objectively technical perspective, help mitigate DOS attacks and security attacks. Like there's not really much room for debate on those. And some of them, the great consensus cleanup, which we've talked about a little bit before as well, addresses some of those at the consensus level. But again, these policies are just at the policy level. But the one that is an outlier is the OP return. So fast forward to more recent times, I personally came of the opinion a little over a year ago, that my opinion was that Core should remove the OP return policy. And the reason, what my journey was, I learned as soon as Slipstream launched from Marathon, I immediately got concerned about this creating a potential like centralization force for Bitcoin. So I reached out to Marathon, and good on them to like take the call. I grabbed a couple of core devs. We chatted with them, and fortunately they genuinely knew what they were doing. They had people who, because a lot of miners I don't think understand all these details, and I was worried about them accepting transactions that could present security or DOS attacks to the network. But they knew what they were doing and generally had a handle on that. But then that led me to realize why they introduced that product, and then that product became relatively popular, and a lot of non-standard transactions were being mined, almost all of them just using OP return, getting past that. So that's when I realized this policy, while well-intentioned if you want Bitcoin to only be for money, it's ineffective. So even if that's what you want, it doesn't work. Like OP return transactions that exceed 80 bytes are being mined on the blockchain today on Bitcoin, and there's nothing you can do about it. So then I learned that it's this outlier policy among all the other policies. I feel like all the other policies, there's very strong objective technical reasons for them, but not this one. So I became an advocate for removing it over a year ago. I didn't push hard. I just sort of asked around and asked some questions. I didn't push hard, though. I didn't feel super strongly about it. But then fast forward to the past week, I think, on April 17th, there was an email from a core developer to the mailing lists saying like, this is going to change, or there's a PR for this to change in Bitcoin Core. And that's what started the uproar. And then this past week, it moved to social media. And so tons of people learned about this just recently. And I think that's one of my lessons here is that, like, I think a emotion or sentiment from a lot of people is like, this feels rushed, or it feels wrong. It feels rushed. Have people thought it through? And there's, and there's people that have been thinking about this for a long time. So I don't think it's rushed, but I understand why people think it's rushed.
Mm-hmm.
To add to that, one reason it is urgent to do it, a rationale for why Core should add this soon, is that there's a venture capital funded startup called Citrea that wants to add some data to the blockchain. It's not a JPEG. It's a zero knowledge proof that takes up more data than the 80 bytes allowed by op return. So they can't use op return if they want their transactions to be relayed by Bitcoin Core. So instead, they can still store this data that they need on the blockchain, but through less efficient means, in means that would hurt all Bitcoiners. The way they store the data on the blockchain is to store it in UTXOs. Mm-hmm. And the way the system is designed, as I understand it, is that they'll never be spent. So UTXOs, the reason why they're important for all Bitcoin users, anyone running a Bitcoin Core node, the UTXO set gets loaded into memory. So the bigger it is, the more memory you need. So if that grows out of control, it increases your costs on your computer to run Bitcoin Core. So the Bitcoin Core developers are always trying to reduce the UTXO set size.
Because a key principle of Bitcoin is you want to make the node so small that you can run it on very cheap hardware.
Yes.
Right.
And that lots of people can run it. You don't need to rely on a big organization.
Yeah.
You can do it on a $100 computer or something, right?
I would argue, and I'd like to come back to this thing, I think that is the key point, actually.
Yeah. So, so if this op return policy were eliminated or relaxed, then Citrea could store the data with op return. And like I said earlier, op return, it's provably unspendable. So they don't go into the UTXO set. They don't impact the amount of RAM you need on a computer to run Bitcoin Core. So it's undeniable that it's better if this data is going to be stored. And again, no one can stop it. It's better to do it in a way that doesn't go to the UTXO set. So there's and they're launching their product this year, I'm told. So that's why there's some urgency to get this out. Now that forms one narrative, which is, one thing I've seen is like Bitcoin Core dev who's an angel investor in Citrea is pushing this through. Mm-hmm. And apparently Jameson Lopp is an angel investor in Citrea, but again, he's not a core dev. He doesn't have the power to hit the button to merge a core PR. He's just an advocate for this change. My understanding is an advocate for this change for the same kind of reasons I am and many others are. So I think it's FUD to say that this is a VC funded company shoving a change through affecting all Bitcoiners, but that's a narrative that's mm-hmm. out there.
Well, two really important things to clarify on this. One, if something is an op return, and I think this gets to for me, what's the meat of the debate? You can prune that information away and not have to store it and still have a copy of every UTXO. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, the most important thing, the UTXO set, the way Bitcoin Core is designed, it has to be loaded into memory, mm-hmm. and none of the op returns are in that. So it's cheaper to have data that's stored on disk than in RAM. Mm-hmm. And so for a full node where you keep the full archive, you'd still keep the op return data, mm-hmm. but it can just stay on disk.
Got it. Okay, so that's a very key point. Second clarifying question. When Satoshi put Chancellor on the brink of bailouts in the very first block, was that op return?
I think that's in the Coinbase.
Okay,
so
that's in the Coinbase, right?
Yeah, that's another detail. I'll give a quick overview. I don't think we need to get in that much of the weeds, but you can store data in the Coinbase. You can store it in the witness script, and you can store it in op return, and you can store it basically anywhere. Any part of the transaction data you can weave in, interleave data within that, especially like Schnorr signatures. You can do some wild stuff as well.
So one thing I just want to pause on, and we want to hear the other side of this, but to me, I would reframe the debate slightly. I see it, and again, not being anywhere near as in the weeds as you are on this, but I actually don't see the debate over data, arbitrary data versus monetary data. To me, that's actually like it's a silly and almost pointless debate, I would argue. And the idea of whether or not you want JPEGs and all this stuff, again, I kind of see that as pointless. To me, the core issue is the point you were raising. Can the common man run a full node or not? Full stop. If the common man, and by that I mean, let's say someone in an emerging market that doesn't have a lot of money, with the resources that he or she has, bandwidth, storage, and compute, if they can run a full Bitcoin Core node for a reasonable amount of money relative to their salary around the world, then Bitcoin has achieved its goal in my mind, and awesome. If not, then game over. And the reason I feel so strongly on that is twofold. One, trying to make the distinctions between monetary information and non-monetary information is a very arbitrary and slippery slope, right? From the very first block, right? Like we're already putting non-monetary data in there. And to your point, like monetary data is just data. And like you can say, okay, well, the intention of this is to be more monetary, which I agree with. But again, it's like, well, you know, what counts as truly monetary data?
UTXO is a core part of how Bitcoin works, and that's the thing that allows you to prevent double spending.
Yes.
You could double write an op return, but you can't double spend a UTXO. So UTXO is like the monetary data, right?
Totally. But my point is, like, one could argue that's not just a monetary data. Like, let me rephrase this in a better way. I had a podcast this week with Drew Bansel. It's an absolute banger. Shout out, a little show for my podcast, Ideas from the Edge. Hopefully we'll be releasing in the next week or two. It really is an incredible conversation, because Drew is, like, I think the smartest person I know in Bitcoin. And one thing we talked about is the concept of the happy accident in technology. And this is something Kevin Kelly talks about a lot as well. You go into something, even as the creator of a technology, once you release in the world, you are not the owner of that technology. You may say, I intend for it to do X, Y, and Z things, and that's fine, and you push in that direction. But ultimately, we don't know what a technology is used for until it actually gets used. And so I would argue, and I know a lot of people have talked about this for years, that in addition to being a monetary system, in order to build a monetary system to solve the double spend problem, what Satoshi actually built was a universal clock, right? And so one can argue, well, the universal clock is the biggest use case for Bitcoin. Yes, it's critical for monetary use cases, but maybe that clock in the future becomes really important for other, you know, really critical use cases as well. And the only way to use that clock of, like, this came before this, ordering things in a way that people have a global state on, is, you know, to have proof of work and all these systems. All that to say, like, I clearly, like, also want monetary first. That's, like, my bias. But I'm just saying that, to me, the key argument comes down to, and this is why I got out of the Ethereum world and all the other stuff years ago, is, you know, if you look at two curves, there's one curve, which is the rate of growth of the chain. There's another curve, which is the cost of consumer hardware, bandwidth, storage, and compute to run that node. If this gets bigger than this, if it's steeper, then the system will become centralized over time. It's a question of if, not when. So to me, coming back to your point, Steve, and again, without being in the weeds, I'm sure there's lots of things I don't know, but it comes down to, if op return makes it more decentralized, if a larger op return and easier for the common man to run a full node, then that seems like a good thing to me. If bloating the chain with non-monetary data increases the cost to run a full node, that seems like a very bad thing.
I want to follow up on that in a couple of different ways. We love audience questions, though, and comments. So Thomas Rosti says, but data in the witness is cheaper. Even if you remove op return limit, it won't be used. So that's a good point.
That's a good point, yeah.
It's my understanding, it's generally true, what is said there. There's only, like...
We talk about op return and data in the witness.
And what the hell is the
op
witness?
return is a type of transaction that's non-monetary, right? Doesn't have a UTXO. What is the witness?
The witness is where cryptographic signatures are stored. This concept is introduced with SegWit change. I mean, obviously, signatures have been stored in the blockchain since day one, but the witness area was introduced in SegWit. It's where signatures are stored, but it turns out, like, any data can be stored there. So inscriptions and basically, like, to simplify it, the JPEGs are stored in the witness. So large amounts of data can be stored in the witness. And part part of the point that Thomas is making. With the SegWit change, there's a SegWit discount with data stored in the witness. And that means it's cheaper to send it's 25% the cost for every byte stored in the witness versus a byte stored elsewhere in the transaction. There's a very logical reason for that. It actually comes back to the UTXO set, trying to reduce pressure on how big the UTXO set grows. So with SegWit, the pricing mechanism makes it more costly to create data that has to go into the UTXO set. So that's what the witness is. So the point being made by Thomas is that because you get this witness discount, it's cheaper to broadcast your transaction. You're going to tend to want to store data there. That's true for if your data is over a threshold. I believe I was told last night by a core dev that it's like 137 bytes. So there's a certain threshold. Anything under that, it's cheaper to use op return because there's a little bit of overhead with using the witness data approach. So that's why these large JPEGs, videos, whatever you want to do, you use the witness to get the discount. But something like Citrea, who just wants a zero knowledge proof that they want to store, and it's something like 100 and like little over 100 bytes. So it's more than the current 80 byte limit, and it's less than this threshold, I believe. So it's these niche, that's another thing. The reason this particular issue is being completely blown out of proportion, because we're really only talking about a very niche set of use cases that would even utilize this relaxed rule. And it's also the kind of data that I think most people wouldn't be bent out of shape about. Like Citrea is not storing JPEGs on the blockchain. They're storing a zero knowledge proof on the blockchain. Yeah. So
one follow-up question there is an alternative approach to reduce the SegWit limit such that you could store this there.
Store what?
The Citrea, like the 100 bytes.
I don't think so, because it gets back to the kind of overhead is like fundamental Bitcoin transaction data. So I think the answer is no. Getting back to the points you were making, Max, I agree with your reframing, but I think it's important to talk about the framing that we were talking about because that's a lot of the drama. So I don't understand why Luke Dash Jr. and people at Ocean believe so strongly in filters, or they believe strongly that you can stop this data being stored in the blockchain. And they're very pro filters. They created a mining pool called Ocean, and when they launched, they filtered out all this data. They very quickly changed course when they realized no miners wanted to use them because they don't make any money then, or they don't make.
Just to clarify, filters means there's a certain type of transaction that gets submitted to the mempool that they say they're not going to process.
They won't mine.
Which means they're making the market for transactions, the block space, less competitive.
Yeah, for themselves.
For themselves, for anybody
they
who
make less.
use.
Yes.
Yeah.
They did make less money. So they had to introduce a non-filter version, and any miner using them can switch to that, which any sensible
miners are
like a non-ideological pro, I need to pay the bills miner would turn that off. I honestly don't understand why Luke believes it's possible to filter out the data, but he does. And because he's respected by many people on Bitcoin, has a huge following. There's many reasons I think people have respect for Luke. I have respect for Luke, but I definitely don't take everything he says at face value.
Right.
He has some like wild views. Yeah. I always read his views. I love Luke, love his views. He's representative of like Bitcoiners who just are like wild and wacky, and they keep Bitcoin strong. So I do respect that, but I definitely have learned he's not always right. In fact, he's often wrong. And because he's so technical, I don't understand why he believes that it's possible to stop this data being stored in the blockchain. But because of that, he's influenced many people in Bitcoin to think that we can. So then that creates narratives that like Bitcoin Core's gone rogue. They're, being coerced by venture capitalists to enable JPEGs. And that's wrong for so many reasons, including the fact that the JPEGs already are on the blockchain, independent of this change. And as we just said a few minutes ago, this change literally it'll effectively only enable a few niche cases of data that's like between 80 bytes and like 137 bytes, which is typically going to be things like zero knowledge proofs.
What's the mechanism that is it? Taproot Wizard is the big JPEG one that everybody talks about. What's the mechanism they're using?
Inscriptions and witness data.
Witness data. Okay.
Yeah. Well, one other thing, just again to add to that, I think your point about a lot of Bitcoiners. Like, look, I also think that my general philosophy is zoom out, look at the big picture. Are you building a system that promotes freedom? Free markets, the ability to run nodes? If so, awesome. If not, maybe time to question that. And I think it's also important to remember that Bitcoiners are awesome, particularly early Bitcoiners. But to your point, just because you're right on one thing, a lot of Bitcoiners are also pretty extreme in a lot of views. Like this whole bizarre narrative around like, oh, we only eat meat. Like that is so weird, has nothing to do with Bitcoin. And yet there's a big portion of the community that believes it. A lot of the early OGs, by the way, are vegan, which is very interesting as well. So I think it's just important to separate out, like there's a lot of different philosophies around a lot of things that we lump together. To me, what this reminds me of a little bit, and I don't mean to be too incendiary at this, but a little bit of like the 2017 like block size debate wars. And it's kind of like the Bitcoin Cash, Bcash, and the Bitcoin Satoshi's vision that were so, no, listen, we need this and we need it right fucking now. We can't wait for this to develop over time. Therefore, we're willing to do it, whatever it takes. And there was like a strong ideology. In my mind, it's kind of like, look, I said this last week, nature is going to nature. Another way of saying that is free markets are going to free market, which doesn't mean we shouldn't be grateful for people like Steve that actually put in a lot of work on this stuff. But like, I don't know, man, if it promotes free markets and more freedom, like I don't really see why anyone should care. It's like if someone wants to pay, as long as they're paying, if someone wants to pay to store whatever in the mempool or in a transaction, it's kind of none of my business. I'm not going to do that.
I agree. There's at least 3 more areas I want to dive into that I think are really important. So let's get to it. Because we have other exciting topics to talk about as well.
There's more happening.
We've not really gone deep on the mining centralization concern. And I think a lot of people don't know this or appreciate it. So let's talk about it. So,
and is that related to the drama? Okay.
It is definitely related to this. So I mentioned a little over a year ago, talked to Slipstream, got concerned. Here, let me play out a possible future that it would be concerning to all Bitcoiners.
Yes.
Let's say that, so Core has this policy, doesn't really relay these OP return transactions that are over 80 bytes. Let's say that that there are products developed where they become popular. And that did happen the last couple of years. Then Slipstream emerges. It's a company. It's a proprietary service. It's not publicly broadcasted like regular transactions. If a sufficient number of transactions only go through Slipstream that pay high fees, and that thus the only way a miner can see those transactions to mine them is to become a customer of Slipstream.
Right. That's a problem.
They have to register. They have to apply, register. Please, Slipstream, can I be your customer? Sign their terms of service. Be in the right jurisdiction globally. If they have to do that, that's an enormous problem. Now, why would they have to do that? They would have to do that if sufficient percentage of the revenue that they can earn comes from those special transactions. So if it's a negligible amount of transactions, whatever. If it grows to a material amount, and I don't know what percentage that is it 0.5% revenue, 1%, 2%, 5%? 5%, I think absolutely for sure. Because long-term profit margins for miners goes towards zero. So, because of the cycles and stuff, it ebbs and flows to enormous margins to the bankrupt and in between. But long-term, it will converge towards zero. So if you lose out on 5% of your potential revenue, you absolutely will not be competitive or profitable. Right. You'll go bankrupt. So whatever that threshold is, though, it's extremely dangerous game if miners have to do that. So small miners would just simply not be able to do that. So what do? You sign up with a larger pool to mine your blocks for you and pick the transactions. That would be your only option.
Yeah,
it's extremely centralizing. So
I mean that already happens, though, right? there's big pools that small miners sign up to. There's just not
which is a problem.
It's a huge problem.
So that
Yeah.
anyway, another show we can get into Stratum V2 and how that can be solved in braid pool and different protocols. But that is a problem. I mean, the long term vision for Bitcoiners should absolutely be that we enable like anyone to be able to mine around the world.
Yes.
So that and it also piggybacks off the earlier point that Max made, which is we want to make it really cheap to run a Bitcoin node, not only just a miner, but a Bitcoin node. It you want it to cost like $100 or less so that you can have like a home miner. That should be our objective. So in any case, it's very important not to have these proprietary APIs that a miner has to do or feels compelled to do just to be competitive. So that is why it's very dangerous to have non-standard transactions that become popular.
Yep.
And so if you look at the non-standard transactions that have become popular the last couple of years, it's 99% this OP return one. It's not the other. I mentioned those other categories, security like concerns, DOS concerns. Businesses aren't creating those because they aren't useful other than if you want to attack Bitcoin. Yeah. The only useful type of transaction, and we can debate whether it's useful or not, but to some businesses and customers, it's useful, are these OP return ones.
Okay, there's a lot to go in here, and this is very interesting to me. So my impression was the reason people would do these side deals or like out of band mining deals was because, and I think this opens up the question of MEV or miner extractable value, but because, like I know there's this rune thing dropping and like, I want to be at the front of the line or something like that. That was my impression. But if you're saying it's a majority, do you have a sense of how much of it is that versus op return? And as a follow up on the op return piece, what the hell are they using it for?
It's both. Yeah. Like these different systems use different things. So runes uses one technique, and BRC20 uses a different technique, and inscriptions and ordinals use a different technique. So I don't know if I have all of them mapped out in my head, which uses what, but some of them are using op return data.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. One of the B10C, that's his name, did analysis a little over a year ago to actually look at how much transaction fees were paid that went through this alternative route. And one thing we don't know is how much out of band Marathon was paid.
Yes.
So we don't know that, but we do know how many transactions went through Slipstream, and then also what the on-chain fee rate was paid.
Yeah.
And it definitely showed a lot of growth. So
like rough order of magnitude of the last couple of years, what is the growth rate per year? Like the percentage of total transaction?
Well, I suspect that it's gone down the last year because the NFT stuff has gone downhill. But at the time, I mean, it was, I forget the exact percentage, like something on the order of like 0.2% or something. I mean,
got it.
It was not in like a red alarm type of territory, but it's more just like if this continues to grow and it gets to a more material number, then we have a crisis. So my TLDR argument for why we should remove this policy in Bitcoin Core is like, let's not mess with that potential future. And there's no drawback to removing it. Any drawback that I've seen people raise is due to that they're not informed on all the facts. So I'm not aware of a drawback, and it avoids this potential future.
It's a compelling argument. Taking a step back even beyond that, and I like that framing a lot, like whatever avoids miner centralization is critical. What is your view on the development, not only for this case, but of all out-of-band miner transactions? Like, for example, when I first saw Mempool's accelerator project, I was like, oh, this is cool. And like for businesses, right? Like I really need to open this Lightning channel quickly, like I'm willing to pay a high fee. Like that is an extremely useful thing. Do you think that even putting this use case aside, over time, does the existence of these accelerator-like products threaten the centralization of Bitcoin mining? And if so, what else can we be doing to make sure that doesn't happen?
It depends on how popular they become, because they've existed for like over a dozen years.
Yeah.
So they've existed a long time. They themselves have not caused harm. I mean, well, number one, we can't really do anything about it. I mean, these businesses get created and they're using the Bitcoin protocol. So part of the answer is like tough luck. It's happening.
Free market's going to free market.
But number two, well, what can we do? Well, that's why in this case where we saw some growth where it could be headed towards dangerous territory, we identified why, and it's this paternalistic. Frankly, one could call it censorship by core. Core software is censoring transactions that use consensus valid OP returns. So we're wanting to, maybe this will help some people get on board. We're removing censorship from Bitcoin Core of these particular transactions.
All in the position.
We identified that as a reason for these accelerators existing. I mean, when talking to Slipstream, like they didn't even really want this product. Like they actually don't even have this product to like make money. They just want to like facilitate the mining.
They need to, yeah.
And they wouldn't need the product if it wasn't for this core policy.
Yeah.
Cool.
Has that been, I guess with all the back and forth on Twitter, has that been presented?
I mean,
I've
written a couple tweets, but you know, once things get out of hand on Twitter, like people
are not
a lot of people
rationally evaluating that. And
I don't think so. So hopefully people are watching this and we're like keeping it a little more patient and calm here.
And I just want to go back just for a second because I think it's important. You know, the Slipstream thing I wasn't aware of. I'm sure every miner has probably some like more OTC handshake version of doing this. The reason I mentioned Mempool is because I think it's an incredible product. In fact, I think it's one of the best products in the space. It's so beautiful, easy to use. And they, for the first time, made it easy to just click a button. I don't know what their numbers are like. I mean, the fee environment's gone down, but to me, if it becomes super mainstream, which I don't blame them either, it's a great business. But that I've gone back and forth and I don't have a strong opinion yet, but is that worrisome at scale?
It is worrisome at scale for the reasons I said earlier. Yeah. I mean, I use Slipstream as an example, but just plug in Mempool as well. Yeah. So,
could they not emerge like in a competitive environment where like Slipstream and Mempool
but
are
again,
each doing it?
Let's always bring it back to like we want to make sure the small miner can exist. So if there's let's say there is competition and there's like 37 providers of this. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a small miner and I want to maximize revenue in my block, I not only have to like just run Bitcoin software and look at the mempool, but I have to sign 37 agreements, global agreements. Right. I have to hire lawyers in like 37 countries to sign these agreements just to see all the transactions. That's a total nightmare. Yep. So that is not the Bitcoin we want. Like there's no debate that we don't want that future.
Right.
So that's why I'm not a huge fan of that part of mempool. Again, if it stays small scale, it's no big deal, but anything that would show growth is concerning, and we need to be asking, why isn't just going through the Bitcoin network, the public Bitcoin network?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And again, the only one I'm aware of where it's like, oh, we can do something about it is by removing this paternalistic policy in Bitcoin Core, which is the PR at hand. So I think we've covered mining really well. Really quick, this is a bit in the weeds, but like the specific PR for Core, which Peter Todd opened, not only removes the limit, but removes the option in the software to allow someone to choose a limit. And so that's a nuanced thing, because the PR could also just make the default no limit, but still give users of Bitcoin Core software a command line option to re-enable the limit and choose the limit. I've looked at different views there. I think the shakeout is, even if you add that option, as we know with any software and options, very few people use the option.
Yeah, people take the default.
Yeah, always. People take the default. So it's a small set of people who take that option, and the type of people who take the option are typically people who are really going to understand the details, and a large percentage of them will not want the limit. So very few people would actually enable the limit, and all it takes, you don't need that many nodes to create connectivity without a limit to make sure that a transaction you broadcast reaches a miner. So there's just no stopping it. So having that option is actually pointless, except for like political reasons or PR reasons. If it makes people happier or feel better about themselves, maybe it's a good idea to have it, but then it creates tech debt for the core developers to maintain that option.
But if the limit is removed, just to summarize what I heard, the limit is removed, today the limit's 80 bytes, and if the limit's removed, that becomes 100 kilobytes.
Due to another policy rule.
And there's no debate around that. I assume that's kind of like not currently up for discussion. So kind of by removing the limit, you ended up at 100.
Yeah, I forget the rationale for that, but it falls into like the security, I think it falls into the.
And those all still have, that 100K has to be stored on the disk, but not in memory of the node.
Yes.
It's cheaper to have disk storage than memory storage. So presumably that would continue to be cheap to run a node.
But again, I don't know why anyone would do that because they can store it in the witness data.
Mm-hmm.
So if they do it, then it's good for miners in the sense that they make more
money. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But, so, okay.
What else we got?
Last thing, and then we can move on to new topics. But I think we're covering this really well. Thanks for the conversation and the time. Last thing is like, when and where should discussions about this take place? Meaning there's a small group of people who've been thinking about this for like literally over a decade, and then a little bit bigger group who've been thinking about it the past year or 2 years. But the vast majority of people who are now participating in the discussion really just came onto their radar in the past week or two. So, because another part of this drama this week is that there is the PR in question on GitHub, where there's typically on a PR, there's just this technical discussion by contributors to that project on like, I found a bug, or can you write it a different way, or just reviewing the code and giving feedback. And then once people agree that yes, this code is sound and makes sense, you can hit merge, and then it gets merged. But what happened with this PR is that like the angry mob came, and like the kind of mob that happens on Twitter came into the GitHub PR, and it just makes a complete mess of the situation for trying to get your job done on that PR. So then that conversation was closed. That PR, like discussion of that PR was closed. So then narrative started that like Luke got banned for commenting, but it turns out anyone was banned, even people who have written code before on the project, such as Luke. The only people with that type of lock on that PR that can still comment would be maintainers, people with commit access. So there was no like targeted banning. I do think there was targeted like removal of posts that were on a, that didn't meet the code of conduct for the project. But the big question here is like, what types of change in Bitcoin Core merit consensus to a broader set of people beyond core contributors? Which types of change merit at least properly informing a broader set of people beyond core contributors? I think those are all very legitimate questions. And so another sentiment I felt and heard from people is like, this felt rushed. Why wasn't I included or part of this conversation, and where should I have this conversation? So one of my opinions is that's an area that could be improved moving forward. I think there's no question a consensus change needs very broad discussion. This was not a consensus change. It was a policy change. I do think it's a special category because most other changes to Bitcoin Core, the vast majority are not a consensus change and not a policy change. So if you're just like renaming the CLI option or something, I don't think you have to go like reach out to the world to get approval. You can just like, if you're a core contributor, you have a few others review the code, make sure it's not going to break things, and you can merge it. So most changes can completely stay contained within the core contributor set of people. Policy, though, I think is a bit of a gray area, and because it does effectively impact everyone because of Core's dominance on the network, I think it merits broader inclusion. It's open for debate. I think the inclusion is more of informing or seeking, like having a seeking feedback period, and then and that should be done not on GitHub PRs. Where should it be done? Well, it can be done on the Bitcoin Dev mailing list, delving on social media and other places. They each have their different, like social media is a shit show, but it's definitely the most reach. The Bitcoin Dev mailing list and delving have a little bit higher bar for like thoughtful posts and more technical posts and more rigor in responses. But I don't know what the right answer there is, but there do need to be forums. I think that the Bitcoin Core project could have done better to inform people much sooner than April 17th this change was going to happen, and giving people more of a time to learn, frankly. Even if I think generally all the decisions being made here are right and correct, objectively so, like giving more people time to digest it, learn, come to that same conclusion themselves, and then not become so emotional.
So This brings up two broader points, which I think are very important for me. Number one, even though the more I learn about this, the more I sympathize with your view on op return specifically. One area that I would definitely agree with the other side of this is I would be super pissed if I felt like I was like silenced on a PR. I get practically why that is. You can't just have like the whole freaking mob when you're trying to make decisions. To me, though, this gets to a much deeper point, which is why the hell are we still hosting Bitcoin Core on GitHub? And, I don't know, guys, like any protocols we know of that might allow for everyone to have a public private key identity, a free market of relays, and the ability for everyone to choose their own algorithm on which comments they get to see so that no one is censoring the other people.
Hole punch? Oh, Noster. Oh, okay, that too.
With
yeah.
G.
Gnoster.
Gnoster, right?
Did you fork Gnoster?
No, I'm actually quite pissed because I wanted to register this. Someone already bought the domain name, but this is I may launch a little product at some point called Gnoster.
Yeah.
For Gnosis, but that's a separate rabbit hole. But anyways, but this is my point. Like I think censorship sucks. Period. I think everyone should have the right to view what they want to view. And I think it's crazy that it's 2025 and we're still having all these debates on centralized forums. And this is why Jack put up that first bounty. Where the hell is our decentralized GitHub clone on Noster? That to me is the real question.
Yep.
I haven't checked comments for a while. Let's quickly look at those before we move on. So YouTube comments were disabled. I'm not aware of that, so I can't really say anything about it. I'm not familiar with this.
Please
Okay.
ignore that. Would they allow 8 billion people using the network? Opening 8 billion channels requires more than a year. I guess, I don't know enough about Citraya.
There's questions about Citraya, which is a roll up. I don't know enough to have intelligence.
I don't know much. I can't answer the question, but Citraya is a BitVM implementation. So it's a zero knowledge proof roll up side chain. You can do stuff on that side chain and then post it back to Bitcoin.
And
So
they're well funded, like Founders Fund led around. It's a real company.
there's several different startups that are funded to do BitVM side chains. It's an experiment. If successful, it probably will create a bunch of tokens and shitcoins that a lot of people won't like, but maybe there's useful things that are built on top of it too.
Yeah.
Cool.
TBD.
I know we're converging and trying to finish this off. We know that we don't know where these conversations should be held, but do we have, just as a final point, what's the next step, or how does the next, how do we make progress, or is there some date by which this may get closure?
Well, that specific PR, if there wasn't the uproar, speaking to a few core devs last night, actually, it has enough acts and review to be merged. So under normal circumstances, it would be merged and go into the next release of core, which I believe would be the one for the fall. And is that going to happen now? I don't know.
Okay, so this dust up may just cause it to be more on ice for a little bit.
I don't know of a good objective reason to not merge it though. The only twist, there could be an alternate, and I believe someone did create an alternative PR which removes the default but keeps the option. And I talked about that earlier, why it's only really valuable for political points or whatever, but maybe that's needed to pacify people.
Yeah. One other major question. What is your opinion on the health of the network with core having that much of a dominance, 98% of nodes in the first place? Now, I understand this tends to happen in most software systems. However, in the Lightning Network, right, it's not that way. We have LND, LDK, CLN, async. Do you think, is this even whether or not I agree with like the knots, people that are trying to specifically filter on this, do you think this could be a good, pause moment for there to be at least an implementation that gets to a few single digit percentage points so it's not entirely core?
I think it's a great topic. It's a half-hour topic, so let's save it for another show. Just because I know we have, because I really want to talk about that. Actually,
it's a very important one.
It's a very important
Yeah.
one. So let's definitely talk about it maybe next week or soon. But it's giving in a one-sentence answer doesn't do it justice.
Okay.
And I know
Okay.
we've got some other